Welcome to Insider Threat, the misec podcast, the bi-weekly podcast highlighting the security community in the state of Michigan while providing inside access to trends and industry professionals across security disciplines. I'm your host, Brian Martinez. My usual co-hosts, Dan Falk and Matt Johnson of the podcast here, are both running behind-the-scenes support for me today because we're here today with a very special live episode. To be sensitive of people's time, some of our guests may need to leave at the top of the hour. Speaking of our guests, our panels today are Matthew Werner of Blumira, Stephen Legge of Antigen Security, David Corcoran of Census, Jasmine Burns of Census, Matt Topper of Uber Ether, and Ida Birdhill of Automation Works Institute. Welcome, everyone. Happy Blur's Day. Thank you for joining us today for our first live podcast. So the goal of today is to amplify some of the security startups that are here active in Michigan and learn more about you and your team. And learn about startups in general. So to kick us off, why don't you each tell us a little bit about yourselves? Why don't you each tell us why did you want to start or join the company that you were with? And I'm going to begin with you, Stephen.
Thanks, Brian. My name's Stephen Legge. Hi, everybody. I'm the CEO at Antigen Security. We're a digital forensics, incident response, and recovery engineering firm, and we started earlier this year. We service primarily regulated industries, and basically if a business is experiencing a breach, thinks they have experienced a breach, or wants to know if they've had a breach, they can come to us to get that answer. In terms of why we started our company, it really goes down to, for us, a lot of the ties and work that we've done in the community, my partners and I and our team, and wanting to make security and incident response specifically both cost viable and easy for even smaller organizations to consume, because oftentimes those smaller organizations especially are the kind that either go under, have major problems, or a lot of impact when an event happens, because they tend to not have as much funds or planning or resources available to deal with those things.
Very good. Thank you. David, how about you?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So Dave Corcoran, I'm CEO and one of the founders of Census. So we started off as an open project for internet-wide data. So we scan the internet constantly and figure out what exists on the internet. We basically collate all devices, software, et cetera, that's running on it. We have the largest and best repository of that in the world. And one of the reasons that we decided to turn that into a company is that we recognized that data set was super powerful for helping organizations realize what their network looks like from the outside in. And the reason outside in is so important is that's how the attacker views your network. And it's amazing, like when we work with customers, like we'll find that they know, we'll find like 30 to 300% more than what they were aware of. And a lot of these things, can lead to some of the major breaches. And so we wanted to create a platform that we could sell, across enterprises. We're starting at enterprises, but then moving down market as well. That's attainable for everyone, so that everybody has 100% visibility of their attack surface, and that they can protect everything. So that was our goal from doing that. I think anything else you want to know? Perfect.
I appreciate that, David. Thank you. Matt, how about you? Matt Topper.
I was going to say two Matts today. So Matt Topper, president of Uber Ether. We focus on the identity and access management realm of the cybersecurity problem. So with everybody working from home, we've seen a ton of change this year, and that also changes the threat models. So helping organizations run that as in general in cybersecurity, enough of us who know what there aren't enough of us, period, let alone those who know what they're doing. So helping organizations get a better stance on IAM, and in many cases run it for them. And why I started Uber Ether, I worked for too many big companies that kept all the money for the owners, and really wanted to build a place that people could come in and just focus on doing great work and being rewarded for it. So that's me and Uber. Not to be confused with the car company.
That sounds awesome, man. Thank you. Jasmine, how about yourself?
Yeah, so DC did a good job explaining census and kind of our genesis. I joined probably a year into the beginnings. Part of my reason in joining was I actually came from Duo Security, which is another security company that's probably widely known in the community. And Duo's mission was to democratize security and specifically around 2FA. And what I liked what Census was doing at that time that I joined was almost democratizing attack surface management, which is this new category in the space. So fun to be a part of that as well.
Very cool. Matt Warner.
Yeah. So, I mean, Boomera has a kind of similar story to a lot of what you're hearing, a lot of what we saw with Duo as well, where, especially for me, I'm Matt Warner, I'm the CTO and co-founder of Boomera. I suppose I should have started there. And really for Boomera, we wanted to give people, especially in the SMB space, an easy and effective cloud SIEM solution, a way to do threat detection at scale that wasn't giving them barriers that they were going to run into. It wasn't really hard to use. It wasn't hard to get data into. It wasn't hard to get threat detection out of. And a lot of easing the burden for them that comes with security, because you can help people move the bar forward with their organization. They'll stay with you, they'll grow with you, and there's a lot of benefit with the organizations as well that you're working with. So yeah, it's a lot of kind of how can we move the bar forward for security as a whole with Boomera? What can we do with data, and how can we kind of grow with everyone together?
I like it, man. Thank you. And Ida, how about yourself? Ida, you're muted. Still muted. There you go.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm the CEO and founder of Automation Works Institute, and I started Automation Institute technically in December of 2017 as a free profit for a nonprofit organization. We became a tuition-based institution in January of 2020, and we do cybersecurity certification training. The reason we decided to do that particular training is that right now, cybersecurity industry has zero unemployment. While the automotive industry is laying off a lot of people manually, certifications in the IT is growing like a weed, and particularly in the cybersecurity area. So we felt that we could bring women and African American and Hispanic Americans into the industry by providing them the certification with our partner Cisco system. So we're pretty excited. We believe that we are on a trajectory that we're attempting to get up to 50,000 students annually because we serve students across the country.
Very good. Okay, so before we go much further, I do want to say, because I didn't spell this out at the top, we have a series of questions that we're going to ask all the panelists here, and I'm going to target them at specific people. If any of you were not targeted and you want to respond, please feel free to let me know. You know, this is definitely an open forum here, but all right, with that said, let me move on here. So this is for Ida and Steven. I'm not sure which one of you would like to go first. I guess maybe we'll start with Ida. Why is Michigan a great place to start a company?
First of all, the cost of living in Michigan is lower than any place in America, pretty much. I talked to people in Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York, very high-end places. And one of the things that you've noted during the pandemic, people have been moving out of those places, because if you're going to be stuck at home, you want to be in a place that you can really spread yourself out and you don't have to spend all your money on housing. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you can't deny that the autos have a presence all over the world. And since it does have an impact all over the world, Detroit is the headquarters pretty much of manufacturing and the automotive industry. So if you really want to grow a startup and be close to your customers, we're a good place to do that. Thirdly, I just think that Detroit is a place where people hustle harder. I'm not originally from Detroit. I came here almost 30 years ago and stayed. And even though my children have moved all over the world, they still keep coming back here because the opportunities are great, because you do have the presence of the automotive industry and their suppliers here in Detroit.
That's really awesome, Ida. Just to add to that, one, I agree with everything you said, and actually, Michigan as a state, both Detroit and Michigan as a whole, have an amazing culture and history, and the state actually does a really good job at facilitating and helping to engage in programs like that. And Ida, I'm happy to hear about yours growing. That's really exciting. the Michigan Economic Business Development Corporation, the MEDC does a great job with small businesses, especially for startups and folks that want to start a business in Michigan. So if you haven't checked out those resources, I would highly recommend them if you are a startup or thinking about starting a business in Michigan.
Thank you all for that. Those are great answers. This next one's I'm gonna point at David and Jasmine both, and I'm actually curious to hear from David first, and Jasmine, your perspective as not the CEO of the company. But so the question is, I lost my spot here. Hang on. What does the future look like for you in Michigan as a business?
Yeah, happy to chat about that. Jasmine and I talk about this all the time. I can tell you that from an office perspective, we are going to look more like a co-working space than we do a normal office. I would say, as we've looked at our employees, I would say about a third of them want to remain in the office full time. About a third of them would like to come in 2 to 3 days a week. And then the other third would actually like to be fully remote. So I think it's just really going to be that we're going to change the way that we view work from an office perspective. Obviously, COVID forced us to be remote first, like we had to figure that out. But and I think that we have changed the way that we do our onboarding. So we provide people the same setup at work, whether they're at home or whether they're at work, and we will make space for people that want to come in periodically and people that want to be permanently at the office. And we will fly people in quarterly or more often, that want to be part of the company, in person. So I'll let Jasmine chat a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to the day that we kind of drew a line in the sand and made the decision that every role that we're hiring here on out is open to being remote. And I kind of felt like a little bit of a conundrum. On one hand, the recruiter in me was like, my candidate pool just got so much bigger. And on the other hand, I thought, but it's Michigan and it's Ann Arbor and it's an ecosystem. And I'm so excited. I've been, encouraging, convincing, recruiting people to relocate here for 7-8 years now at various companies. So yeah, I think I'm glad that DC said, we're already thinking about how will we get everybody together at our headquarters, but still hiring all over the country.
Well, and I would like to say that, I want to continue my road show in an RV next year and go visit people where they're at, wherever they're at in the United States, maybe even internationally.
So for those who don't know, DC's referring to his get in the car and go visit all employees in a socially distant, safe manner earlier this year. And we saw a lot of really positive outcomes from that. And as you can see, he's already planning that next year.
David, if you don't mind me asking, how many employees do you have?
Who are we at right now? 60? Does that sound right, Jasmine? It's a lot. I should know that number.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm curious what the rest of you, what you feel like the future is going to bring you here in Michigan with regards to work. Go ahead, Ida.
I think that life is changing, and with life changing, you see a brighter horizon. I have to chuckle because in 2006, I had a high school in the CompuRare building that was a cyber alternative high school. And for the next 15 years, I actually fought with education in the state of Michigan about turning education into virtual. And they told me, oh, it's not going to work. It's not possible. Even though the school, Hustle Techno Preparatory High School, did very well, and no school has matched our performance just yet. All of a sudden, you bring in COVID and the whole world went virtual. We did an acceleration of technology in 5 months that probably would have taken 5 years. And so I think that now that you have things virtually, it opens up the whole world at our doorstep, which means opportunities are everywhere. Now I have to chuckle about the road trip by RV. 60 employees is a lot of people to visit, but it also allows you to be able to see how other people live and gives you the opportunity of how do you sell Michigan, Ann Arbor, and Detroit to those other people when they come here. Because what happens, people look at media and they make judgments on Detroit and Michigan, and those judgments are really untrue. It's only when you get here, you go, oh my God, this place is great. And so I just think that it opens up the door to Detroit and Michigan in a way that has never been open, because that Pandora's box of virtual is never going back. Even though you may have some people who return to the office, you will have a lot more people who want to do remote, and you'll just see a different phenomena as we go forward.
Yeah, it's something that for us, Michigan really has the best culture. I mean, I grew up here, so it's probably a slightly biased opinion, but I mean, we are just over 20 employees here at Blue Mirror, and almost all of our employees are from Michigan because they fit kind of our culture. They fit how we all act. We all like to hang out and talk to each other, and it's one of those areas where, as we've grown, especially through COVID, it's become more apparent to us that especially Michiganders fit within that kind of culture. Like, it's just kind of how we all act. It's how we all fit. It makes the conversations really easy. And similar to Census, what David was saying, more than likely, I think we're going to see that move into kind of a co-working space inside of the office. But from the engineering side, what will you lose, or what I see at least, and I'm sure other startups are seeing this, is you lose that learning through osmosis that engineers get and security get, that you do when you're in person. And I think all of us have tried to replicate that on Slack and on Teams, and it's not the same thing when you do it there. You can try, but you end up being the person like me that's just like throwing stuff on Slack and waiting for someone to respond to you, and you're like, well, I'll try again tomorrow. And it's just kind of it's just because it's kind of the nature of humanity, where you still gotta drag those human touch points back. And I think Michiganders are really, really good at that. So we kind of focus together, and it's grown Census, it's grew Duo, it's grown all the companies and the organizations that we're talking about here. And I think it just really works out well. No offense to the West Coast. We're just better than the West Coast, that's all.
And I'll just throw in, we're better than the East Coast too, because we started growing up in DC. So I grew up in Michigan, moved to DC, and had to come home. It's just different here, as we all know.
You all talking about that, you know, Michigan being kind of I don't know if I want to say unique, but having our own culture just makes me think. I don't know if anyone's watching The Mandalorian right now, but I think it makes me think of This Is the Way, like living in Michigan. This is the way, right?
Oh yeah, it drags you back. You can't leave Michigan. You always end up back here.
Go ahead, Stephen. Looks like you want to.
I do think it's funny though, just real quick, like, right, we've got people with kids climbing all over them on these calls all day long. My kids have a half day here, so they're going to bust through the door in about 10 minutes. And like, everyone on my East Coast team is like apologizing for it. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, you're still getting the work done. You're still doing what you do. And like, people in Michigan are like, hold on, let me start a pot of coffee, pull it off the dog, right? Like, it's just who we are, right? So, I mean, to me, that's been my favorite part about COVID is getting to see the personal side of people's lives too, right? And all of us taking and understanding that, right, there is life outside of work, and we're all humans and in this shit show together.
Go ahead, Steve. Looks like you had something to say.
I was just going to add, I love both Jazz, really everybody that's commented kind of on the culture in Michigan. I think that's one of the most special things about Michigan in general, is that, like, what you said, Jasmine, about this being an ecosystem is absolutely true. And really that's my perspective on that, is that the future for any business that chooses to be a part of that ecosystem is pretty bright, because we've done a great job in the state of developing that culture, regardless of what sector or vertical you're in. And built a community of people and organizations who like really care about two things primarily: the heart of what we do, like how the people we touch and you know, the impact that has, and the results that we generate. And I think the auto industry really started and kind of has always held those things at the core of it, knowing how tied they are to the community. And you know, we've kind of expanded that culture to other areas through the work we've done here. So it's really cool.
I really appreciate all those answers. Thank you, everybody. Okay, this next question is for both the Matts. You both started your companies, you know, as subject matter experts in what it is that you do, right? So I'm kind of curious to know, what is it like trying to fill roles that aren't necessarily technical roles or even related to exactly what you do, right? So like, what's it like to, you know, hire an HR person or an accounting person? You know, did you outsource? Did you direct hire? What does that look like to you guys?
Feel free if you want to go first, man.
As I say, go. I'll take it. You hit mute faster. Exactly. So what it looks like, I will say 10 years into this business, I failed as a founder and didn't hire someone soon enough. I really kept all of those HR operations invoice and an accountant from day one, because I knew finance was something I'm not strong in from a business perspective. And so I outsourced that almost immediately. But I kept all the other things to myself, and onboarding new employees, and for way too long. Like everyone joked, that was my night job. And I, about 5 years ago, hired Mary Brennan, who's my chief operating officer, and that honestly changed the way the business ran. Right. It allowed me, right. I still have my night job. Don't get me wrong. As founders, I think we all burn too many hours, but right. I use that time to really think about the future of the company and what we can do and how we can grow, and to connect with the employees that I don't get to connect to on a daily basis because I am still busy on the sales side of the world. I think that's probably my next big hire, is more on the sales side. So Mary has been great for me, and really taken over that entire side of the world. So that's how it works for us so far. I can't complain.
Good.
Yeah, it's been an interesting path for us. So we started in 2018, early 2018. We started in earnest. So we aren't a very old company, and we've definitely gone through kind of that very quick. All right, now we need, and for us, and especially for me, it's a lot around. So we've outsourced some, like obviously we've outsourced legal, we've outsourced finance. Like no one here wants to sit down and mess up legal or finance for many reasons. But when you look at like HR, that's what we're starting to grow into right now. We're growing into recruiting. We've grown out our sales team a lot, our sales and marketing team. And for a lot of what we're moving and what we're doing, it's a lot of where we're going into the future, what we're looking to do in 2021. And really more importantly is, does it reinforce the culture and build a diversity of backgrounds within the organization is a lot of it for us, because we want to make sure that we're continuing the trajectory as we grow and grow that team and get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we've done a lot of utilizing like HR as a service solutions, like heavily leveraging Bamboo HR to make onboarding easier, heavily leveraging those kind of services to make IT automation earlier, so you're onboarding faster and that kind of process. Whatever you can do to make life easier and get ahead of it in the world of startups is always going to make your life easier. Because if you can get ahead of it 6 months before, you're gonna pay it back in that debt 2 to 3 times when it actually hits you. So if you can get ahead of it a quarter or two, and you know this is going to come up, do it every time is really my recommendation in that regard.
So this one wasn't a scheduled question, but it's related. I'm kind of curious to know when you do make those hires of the roles that you're not familiar with personally. Obviously, you have people that are helping you now. Do you try to have like the final say on the hire, or do you just trust the people that you've hired to make those decisions for you?
I'm of the opinion if you're hiring someone in, if I'm hiring someone in, I almost wholly trust them to do the role that I'm bringing them on to do. And there's obviously some validation points there as well, but generally speaking, at least in regard to how I approach it, I bet Jasmine has a lot of thoughts in regard to recruiting and bringing people on. But for me, it's usually it's going to be a process, talking to people who know that person, going through the process to make sure that this is the right person for that type of role, and then kind of saying, go wild. Because especially in a startup situation, if you're bringing on people that you aren't sure if they're going to be able to take over decision making or roles, and that's the place you're putting them in, and then you're going to step in front of them, it's a real tough place to be, because you lose your scale immediately. And you start getting in front of decisions that aren't necessarily yours to be making in that point. So I try, at least especially for Boomera, we try to make sure, and especially from the engineering all the way to the HR to whatever sales, it doesn't really matter. We try to make sure that we position people in places where they can have the power to make decisions and move forward, and we trust them to make those decisions and move forward, because it's the only way for the company to go. Otherwise, it's just a churning gear of, what else can we do? We want to all move in the same direction, which is forward. At least that's how I look at it.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I was going to say, one of the things I usually tell people when I'm in interviews is like, I don't want to create an org where everything has to come to the top and come back down. Like that just does not work. And so Usually I try not to be the person that's making a decision on who gets hired. What I'm trying to do is bring good people in, facilitate it, and then get out of the way, because hopefully these people can do their job, themselves, and be independent to do that. I look at who are they going to be working with the most, like who do they need to be 100% in sync with, and those are the people that I'm really looking or leaning in on to make sure that they're bought into this particular individual, that we're trying to bring in.
I appreciate the insight there. Thank you. All right, this next question, excuse me. This next question, I'm going to toss at Ida and Matt Warner. How has the pandemic impacted you and your client base? I think we have an idea from Ida a little bit, but go ahead and expand on that if you can.
Well, for me, it's a little different because I did a pivot. Normally, we cater to individual students because we have an income share agreement. But I decided, because you had the pandemic and then right after it, you had the Black Lives Matter protests, that was a good time to have a conversation about diversity. Particularly since I have an HR background, a financial background, and I wrote a couple books about diversity, one of them being Invisible Talent Market, and the other called Diversity, a Reskilling Payday. So for us, we actually started to cater to institutional clients and picked up 2 institutional clients within a matter of a month. One was a pretty large marketing firm that we're doing a people management competition with. And then the second one, we're doing an HR marketing and public affairs audit for diversity for that company. So for us, it was great. I have to laugh though, because one of the clients I picked up is in California. And I actually picked him up from a speaking engagement at a virtual conference that dealt with the Black Lives Matter protests. So for us, it's been great. I mean, I actually in a month, I got $153,000 in institutional business. And now we're starting to see it now come in, with the average case being about 100,000 each now. So for us, the pandemic has been great because it took me to places that I couldn't have gone, because normally whenever you do anything outside of Michigan, you used to have to get on a plane and then go sign a deal. Now we're signing a deal over Zoom and the check comes in the mail, or better yet, for one of the clients, everything came by wire. So for me, institution, you have to sometimes make a pivot on how you see things. And so it allowed us to be able to expand our institutional business, but that we thought we wasn't going to get to for a couple of years, and we did it within a couple months.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. That sounds more negative than I intended it to. It's been a good time. But not a good time for all of us, because we're dealing with COVID and everything else has been going on in this crazy year of 2020. So it's a weird thing, COVID. So in the beginning of COVID, when we all started seeing it, we all shut down our offices in March that had them really, I think February, March, we all just kind of went, all right, let's all just go back and stay in our houses until we figure out what's going on here. And when we did that, everyone else did the same thing. We saw some pullback. We saw organizations say, well, we're not sure what's going to happen in April, so let's talk again then. So we saw some downturn. I'm sure a lot of people saw that downturn in March into April. And once people got past that, and as we've all seen now, people just accept reality and move forward at one point or another. Which we saw in that April time period. People were like, well, I have to have security. I can't not have security. And my company's not going under, so I need to continue forward. And what we saw was really that kind of pullback went away, and people went pretty deep very quickly back into, well, I still have things I need to solve this year. And so for us, it's really been more of a change of people moving into the cloud faster, people moving a lot faster into, well, I was going to adopt Office 365 and Azure at one point, but now I'm just going to do it because I don't have as much of a choice anymore. And what that's done is it's increased risks inside of organizations, it's increased their attack surface, and it's increased the amount of data they're producing as well, and the differential, well, just nature of that data that's coming out of it. So for us, for Boomera, and for I'm sure a lot of security organizations, what we've seen is, or at least what Boomera has seen, is that kind of shift back and forth where people were kind of, all right, I'm accepting it, I'm moving back into purchasing, I really like how we're moving forward, we like that it's simplifying our life and making things easier. And now a bit of a more, during Thanksgiving when COVID is going back up, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And that's really a much shorter time period is what we've seen, and because of COVID, because people got used to it, and then it happened again, and people got used to it very quickly this time. because it's just kind of the nature of the world right now, especially until we move forward with COVID. So for us, it's really more about improving that time to value. And that's really helped a lot with COVID, whereas you can say, we're going to make this life easy for you really quickly. It's even more impactful during COVID time because there's so much benefit. If you can take something that's usually a 2-week project and make it a 3-hour project for someone during COVID, you've saved their life essentially. And we push really hard in that direction to make sure that time to value comes with it a lot, because things have been so hard this year. We want to make sure that for Blumira, and when people are onboarding Blumira as an organization, it's just as easy as they would want it to be for their organization.
Any of our other panelists, if you want to weigh in, please feel free.
Yeah, I was just going to say on, similar to kind of what Matt said, we changed, and are still in the process of changing some of our sales process, our process for onboarding, just reducing friction. I would say that's the theme of everything. Like the days of getting on a plane and buying a steak dinner for a CISO and trying to sell stuff, those are over. And the funny thing is, like, I've interviewed a whole bunch of executive sales folks recently, and like a whole bunch of companies are facing this. They're changing the way that their sales motion is happening. And everybody is recognizing the fact that this is going to be permanent. Like, this is not something, we're not going to go back in 6 months and go back to get on planes, steak dinners, multi-million-dollar deals. I mean, some of those will still exist, but I would say the sales motion is changing drastically. Like, people expect to be able to get value very quickly, as Matt said. And people want to be able to try things, get their foot in the door, and reduce that friction from time to value.
All right. So this next question is for everybody. So feel free to weigh in, I guess, as you see fit. If someone were to start a company, what would be your number one thing to remember?
Can I take that one?
Go ahead. I see you're still in mute, so go for it.
I would say, I would say, make sure that the first 3 to 5 people that you hire really represent the culture that you want to build in that company long term. And what I mean by that is that people struggle when they come in early. They either need to stay narrow in their role or they need to grow. And some people don't want to be hired above. And like setting that expectation very clearly, I think, is really important. And I think the other thing is hiring people that that culture, like what kind of culture do you want to create? If you want to create a culture of mastery and, high energy, a number of different things that maybe you want to do, empathy, et cetera, like you just need to make sure that those first few hires have those traits, and really look for those people carefully, because weeding those people out is tough, and they are going to end up hiring people that represent them as well. So I would just say that I think a lot of people act very quickly early on when they start a company, because they're just, so many things are flying at them. But that is when you need to be take the utmost care to choose who is part of your org.
Yeah, if I can add to that, one thing that's kind of come clear to us is hiring people that are equally, if not more, passionate about the problem you're solving and the mission of the company. If you bring those people in, they bring energy, they bring innovation, they bring ideas, and just kind of amplify that culture you're trying to build. If you bring people in it's just a job for them. Again, if they're hiring, they're going to hire people that just want a job. And so we've actually kind of made a point recently in our interviewing to just really make sure we're finding people that are like the problem set. That's going to get me out of bed every morning. We're seeing a lot of success there.
Yeah, I fully agree. That's huge. And I guess the other thing for me is realize it's a grind, and it's going to be a grind for years, right? And if you're not passionate about what you're trying to solve, and you're not going to jump in with 2 feet, don't kid yourself, right? I love the startup community. I think more people should run their own business and grow this community, but at the same time, understand it is hard. So make sure you've got your finances personally, right? Make sure you've got enough headroom to survive without right? Call it ramen for 6 to 12 months, because right, I've always said I pay my employees first before I get paid, right? So make sure you're ready for those type of commitments in your life, and make sure your spouse is too.
Yeah.
Because right, it takes a toll on the entire family.
I was going to add to what Matt was saying just a second ago. Somebody asked me just recently, they're like, they were part of a startup, and they're like, when does the stress end? And I said, about 6 months after you sell it, which is the truth. Once you no longer feel like you're responsible for payroll and everything else that's happening in the company, then the stress ends.
And
it doesn't end,
and their families and their lives. Like, sadly for me, like, that's a huge part of my stress is like, if someone's kid is sick, you're like checking in every day, right? You care, right? They become your family.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you take on a lot of people's problems, and that's challenging. I
think the underlying message that I hear in all of those are great points. The underlying message that I hear in all of that we've been living this whole year has been be deliberate and know what your critical path is, and don't get distracted from that. Really focus on the things that you as an organization are focusing on, and build that vision and focus on that vision above everything else. Because if you're aligning the right culture, if you're caring for people, if you're cognizant of all these other things, that's the strategy that really launches you, right? If you have the grit to see that through. So.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said, and I'm gonna take this in a slightly heavily technical direction, but I won't go too deep into it. I mean, culture is everything. If you don't start building culture, exactly what's already been said from the starting point, it's an uphill battle that you will have a really hard time digging out of. And the way that I kind of look at it is, build teams so the best idea wins, not the biggest ego or the strongest voice in the room. That comes with empathy. It comes with making sure that people understand what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and that they're doing what they want to be doing. Because if they aren't engaged, exactly what Jasmine Day was saying, if they aren't engaged, you've either not made the right hire, or you don't have them in the place that they need to be at, or they don't have the right management. And you get into this list of ors that you have to then start knocking down, because you didn't get ahead of kind of the culture and how you're approaching it. And for me, especially as the CTO, and this is something that I accepted back in my earlier startups, but people who maybe haven't started a company, maybe haven't thought about this yet fully, that a good technical idea is irrelevant if you don't have proper sales and marketing and strategy and culture in place. It doesn't really matter if I come up with the best technical idea ever. If no one finds out about it, if no one is selling it, and no one is able to buy it, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of it all. So you can solve every technical problem, and it's important to solve those technical problems. We work on them every day here, for example, and I'm sure everyone on this call is fighting against them as well in their own ways. But you got to make sure that you're piecing together those technical problems with the other components of your organization, and then growing them all together, because that's how you get to that really nice place as you grow of, I have a culmination of teams, they're working together in the same direction, and not I have a bunch of people that are doing some stuff and they really hate dealing with each other because that team thinks they're always right and that team also thinks they're always right. It's really important to move in the same direction, and that means that every leg is just as important as every other leg, so they all have to kind of step in line together.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's great insight. Thank you again for all of that. All right, so our last question that we have on our list, other than our normal questions that we ask of every guest, is something that. So I just started my own company just a month ago. I've done pretty much nothing with it at this point. But one of the things that I always appreciate is seeing on Twitter and some other friends that I have, like on Facebook. And seeing their successes. Like I get to see, like, oh man, he just bought this brand new Mercedes, or oh, they just got this new house because they didn't, they made their first big sale. So I'm curious, you don't have to share this if you don't want, but I'm curious if you wouldn't mind speaking about your first big success. Like, what did you do afterwards? Or if you'd rather, flip the question, I'm curious to hear about maybe your first big failure and what did you learn from it? You don't have to share both, but I'm curious to hear what you people have to think, or I'm sorry, what you folks think about that. Stephen, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
So I think I'll take the first big success. You know, when we were doing our first jobs ever and we didn't have a process for delivering, you know, the services that we were delivering, we were building it, you know, building that car while you're driving it. That while the money was really sweet, that learning was the best reward. And because doing that right and kind of encapsulating that into a process that you can repeat and scale becomes everything. Like not doing the same thing over and over again, but doing it in a way that you can repeat it and make that effort amplify itself or expand by orders of magnitude. That's like the key to growing any business. And so the first big success we had, you know, delivering that first job and getting paid for it and making that money, you know, while it in and of itself wasn't that significant as an event, the things that we learned from it and kind of getting us started down that track was really, I think, the critical piece that we took away from it.
Good. I'll just go around on my screen. I guess the way I see it, since I started with Steven. DC, how about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a very simplistic approach. So I think, you know, POs, like first sales, first POs, and I think the reason that is it just the energy of the company just increases. You know, when you're selling, like, people are excited. People are excited to know that the products that they built are being used by Fortune 50 companies and that sort of stuff to protect themselves. I just remember when we got our first purchase order, like, I printed it off, I nailed it to the wall, and I bought a Crave case of White Castles. Like, I remember that day, and it was awesome. And like, the energy in the room, there was only 4 of us at the time, or 6 of us at the time, was immense. And again, like, if you can keep that going, even small wins, like, they don't have to be big wins. In fact, I would tell people not to wait for the big wins. The small wins are good. Just to know that your product is being used by people and it's helping protect them. And I think that's very motivating.
Matt Topper.
So I'm going to flip it and say the big failure.
Okay.
So I think our biggest failure so far has been not spending enough time and money towards marketing, sales. And right, I have, there's no nice way to say that, right, a good presence in the identity and access management industry. And most of our work early on came from family and friends, right, essentially, right, people we've grown up with in the industry. And I leaned on that for way too long. And luckily, I have been good fiscally and keeping money in the bank for the company. But when the pandemic hit, that we had a bunch more people on the bench than I've ever had, and really had some puckery moments of, all right, shit, I got to get this straight. And we've really started to invest more with our vendor partners, with our co-selling partners, and that helped immensely. So.
Jasmine, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think I'll go twofold on this question. I think a failure is not looking at your failures as learnings and saying, like, you know, shoot, we messed up, or we didn't get that deal over the fence. Retroing, not just like, how could we have done better? How could we have got that deal closed? How could we have made that higher? But also retroing the wins. How do we do this again? How do we do it bigger? How do we, you know, get more deals? And looking at every outcome and retroing back and thinking failures should be learnings. You should learn from them.
And Matt Warner, how about you?
Yeah, and so, I mean, I have a bunch of failures from back in my early startups, but in regard to Blumira, at the very least, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what a lot has been said here. Those first sales are one of those big things. They're like, we can do this. This is going to work. Keep going. And those ongoing failures, which is just part of being a startup. Like, there's no situation where you're not messing up. You just need to fix it and retro it and improve it moving forward. But for us and for Blumira, 2020 really has been just massive for us across the board, and we doubled our employee count this year. We brought on sales and marketing this year. We got our first awards as an organization from G2, like easiest to admin, easiest to use, easiest to set up. So this whole year has been really exciting for us as a success of just, even in the complexity of 2020, being able to continue to push forward, continue to deliver good service with a good product and keep moving forward. Has been really exciting, and it's been really exciting to watch my team grow, and see the organization kind of see the benefit of their good work and keep pushing forward with the organization. And just seeing the security community grow as a whole, especially in the Ann Arbor, Detroit community, is amazing, because it's something that we've been all watching, especially in a lot of the other organizations, and there keeps being more and more of us, and it's just a really exciting kind of a success for the community as a whole that I'm really excited to watch grow into 2021 as well.
Just to add to that, because I really loved all of your answers a lot more than my own, and it got my gears turning. I think, Jasmine, what you said was really, really wise, and Matt, what you added to that was really wise, because really those failures or the mistakes that happen, the little hiccups, ball drops, whatever, if you relate to those like they're opportunities to do the right thing by your clients, and you use that to build the relationship, that is everything, especially early, because those relationships are what are going to sustain you on the long term. You know, you mentioned partnerships, channel sales, all of those aspects, those elements, creating funnels and paying attention to the pipelines that you're building in the relationships that you build is really the key to everything, especially early on.
Those are all great, encouraging answers. So we have talked about learning here a little bit in this last question. And now we move on to our final segment where we ask our guests all of the same things. So continuous learning is part of the security industry. Every episode, we share something that we've learned in the last 2 weeks. It could be something big, could be something small. It could be you learned you're coming on the podcast, I guess. But you can't use that one because I just said it. Anyway, so I'm going to start with you, Stephen. Again, I'll just kind of go around the way I see it on my screen here. What's something you learned in the last 2 weeks, Stephen?
Well, I learned that 2-year-olds love to use cameras as weapons, and that for every disaster that can happen, a lack of preparation is always the thing you didn't think about. So, you know, just like we tell our clients to be prepared, you know, think about the things you're not thinking about. Look for those blind spots. Find those things. That's what I really have taken away from the last 2 weeks, and also why I don't have a camera today.
I'm sorry to hear about the camera, but that is definitely a good lesson learned there. David.
So something personal. So I learned how to MIG weld last night, which was really cool. Like I've been getting really into metalworking lately, so that's been super fun. But kind of business related, I learned so much interviewing people. So I love to talk to prospective employees, even people that might be a year or two out. And, you know, one tidbit of information, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they told me that in 2010, there were 10,000 software companies, and now there's 100,000 software companies. And they expect there to be 1 million software companies before 2030. And it just goes to show you, and it reminds me of, like, you know, my former startup that I had, you know, there might have been a half a dozen competitors. And now there's probably 30, you know, for, you know, what we have now, maybe 50. And it just goes, so, you know, I got into this conversation. It's like, how do you stand apart? Because everybody's already done stuff. And it's like, it's all about just being the best at listening to your customers. Like, if you can do that better than anybody else, and you can build a product that matches their workflows, et cetera, like, that's the way that you win nowadays. And so I just thought that was interesting. Just the absolute sheer number of startups, because of the fact, you know, cloud and everything, like, there's so much less friction to get a company off the ground now.
Matt Topper, how about yourself?
I'm going to nerd out for a second. I learned that there's a new protocol or standard being proposed called CAPE, C-A-E-P, that is finally allowing us to bridge all of the SOC, NOC, symbols with identity and access management, right? All of those key triggers that we see, and right, the SOAR actions that we want to execute, has finally been agreed upon between those SIM and SOAR vendors and the identity world. So now all of those triggers can immediately call out to really your access control layer, right? And your identity governance layer to turn off accounts and disable in-browser sessions. So we finally have that full story end to end to play out. So that's my nerdy one.
That's good. Go ahead, Jasmine.
I was going to say, I think you were going to call me next. Mine is kind of a relearning, but I'll positioned in a different way. So in March and April, we talked about COVID and how we all kind of had to figure it out and get over this. Like, how do we do this? How do we make decisions? How do we collaborate? How do we whiteboard? We're all literally fully distributed. And one thing that became really clear to me was actually this morning was I was sitting in a meeting and not one that I would necessarily add a lot of value in. And I was in the meeting for maybe 3 minutes and I had like a notepad, a whole sheet of paper of like, there's there's themes and things that I can actually kind of help us navigate from a culture perspective. So the learning is, I think, we're 9-10 months into this new work structure and being fully remote. And we need to re-embed ourselves back into the business and kind of get ourselves back at the forefront of those cues that we're missing out on being in person.
That's good. Thank you. Matt Warner.
Oh man, I feel like 2 weeks is such a long period of time in my brain at this point. I also learned that 2-year-olds are evil some days, and they hit very hard. But that's a whole other conversation. Over the last few weeks, what we've been focusing on, what I've been doing a lot of learning on is OT. So like SCADA technologies, a lot of industrial controls and security around them. And the kind of the interesting differentiation you see between normal IT networks, the OT networks that are associated with those networks, and how people approach them, data we can get out of them, how we can kind of leverage that data into being more useful for people, and start separating that from the world of IT, the world of OT, and how those operational things are different, as well as always learning about data types. We're always adding new types of data. So it's always one of those things where we're always just kind of like, but why would that be a thing that's that way? And that's just an ongoing and fun thing that we do every day.
Very good. Okay, last question for everybody. What is one book, professional or personal, that you would recommend to the folks here on the stream or our podcast listeners who will listen to this later on? And I'm going to go back around in the opposite direction. So Matt Warner, I'll start with you.
Let's see. What's a book that I would recommend? That's a great question. Let's see. Probably the one I most read. I'm going to try to do it not a nonfiction or a technical book. Probably To Say Nothing of the Dog. It's a very good book. It's a fiction book. It's a science fiction novel. It has to do with time travel. It's very good. I strongly recommend it if you have the time. Otherwise, of course, I'm going to recommend Amanda Berlin. She works with me. She's a great defensive security book. You should all check it out. I'm sure she's on the stream somewhere saying something right now. But yes, those would be my 2 recommendations.
Very good. How about you, Jasmine?
I've got 3, all business related. I'll fire them off. From Good to Great. It's my favorite business book of all time. For those who are not familiar with startups and what growth can mean and the implications of joining a high growth company, High Growth Handbook is really good. And then this one was actually just reshared with me, which I read a couple of years ago and I loved it. And it really came back to the forefront for us in hiring is the Who hiring method. It's really, really good methodology on making sure you're hiring the best people.
Sounds great. Matt, go ahead.
Sure. So for me, the one lately that has hit home most is a book called Same Side Selling. It was released years ago and just came with a refresh, given with the changing times, and really talks about the traditional battles of you've got all these companies trying to get in the front door and fight for the same CISOs and CIOs, and really think about it as this is a partnership, right? we're here to make the other organization successful, and how you break down some of those barriers as a small company and get the attention to really grow up together and make everyone successful together. So that's been great for me.
David, how about you?
I read a whole bunch of dystopian stuff, I'll be honest with you. So like the book I'm reading right now is 1 Year After, and it's basically about society 1 year after an electromagnetic pulse has been detonated over the United States, and society basically has to rebuild. I love that sort of stuff because I've been a prepper for years. So I love to read about like broken societies and how they rebuild and like how people survive. Like those are my favorite books.
That sounds both disturbing and interesting. Thank you. And Stephen, what's one book, professional or personal, that you'd recommend?
So I'm going to completely reveal where my head's been at this whole year and share two books. One is a favorite of mine that has been since I became aware of it years ago, and that is the book Traction: Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. It's just a great book, whether you're starting an organization or coming into an organization or a role where you're needing to grow or reinvent or get a handle on an organization and start to steer it. It's a great method and set of tools to do that. And the other is a book, an older book on the sales side that I really love. That's kind of the core of the sales methodology that I really like, and that is Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. And that book is one of the only data-oriented sales research books that was ever done, and it was from the 80s, but it's really a breakdown of kind of how conversations happen and what motivates people to make decisions, and it really gets into kind of what building that relationship and having that conversation looks like practically in the nuts and bolts of conversation, with examples, types of questions, things like that. So I really highly recommend it for anybody that wants to focus more on the selling aspect of their business. It's a really useful tool.
Very good. All right, everyone. Well, that's all we have for this afternoon now. I want to thank our panelists for joining us. I greatly appreciate your time and all of your valuable insight. I do want to let folks know that we do have a regular podcast. It's typically bi-weekly. You can find our podcast at podcast.insiderthreatpodcast.com. And we're also on Twitter with the handle Inside Threat Pod. So that's without the insider, Inside Threat Pod. With that said, once again, thank you all very much. I hope you all have wonderful holidays and you be safe. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Take care.